pretty much it. Let me know if you need any water over there. As an opening exercise, we're going to discuss the movie later on, but first a little bit of cultural background to Satan in art and so forth. I'd like to begin by asking you about your favorite satanic tune.
Oh.
From the top, Gabriel. You're going to sing it.
Oh, here we go, yeah. Well, like most Swedes, I of course dabbled extensively in extreme metal in my young age. So, I remember vividly the first time I was scared of the devil, and that was when I heard a D-side song called Satan Spawned the Keiko Demon.
Yeah!
And I remember being in maybe like 7th grade and listening to it, and there's all these lambs and Glenn Benton speaking backwards in the beginning, and I remember vividly thinking, I'm going to hell. Like, I'm playing this, and this is bad news for me. And after that, I just embraced it and kind of took in all the metal after that. So.
I'm going to go with the song Satan is Real by the Lundgren brothers.
Yeah.
I really
good
like,
choice.
I like all Christian songs about Satan, but that one has like a sort of irony that I really enjoy. Is this like the weirdest sounding microphone?
And if you look into the history of the Lundgren brothers, it gets even more interesting, but that's a sort of another time.
Okay, well, it's a tremendously difficult question. My favorite song about Satan, there are so many. But I think I'm going to go down the same road as Gabriel and just mention one of those songs that really ruined me for life at an early age, and that would be The Return of Darkness and Evil by Bathory.
Yes, we have some Bathory representation on the front row. And Mia.
Yeah, I think I'm more... I don't think this is on. I think I'm more of a classic person, so I would say Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'll round it off with Satan Takes a Holiday by Larry Clinton, of course.
Of course.
Very beautiful song, especially with lyrics sung by Blanche Barton. Yes, well, and then we'll head on to some more favorites. Satan in the pictorial arts is our next question, and that's your forte, Mia, so would you like to start?
Right, okay. Well, I have a lot of favorites, obviously, because I'm dealing with these satanic symbols and stuff in my art, so I've studied a lot of art with Satan in the art. But I would say that I love this photo by David LaChapelle. I don't remember when it's from, maybe early 2000s. And it's Michael Jackson dressed up like an angel, and he is standing on top of Satan. And I'm thinking about that image now, like he's, like a victory, because of the recent documentary that was just controversial. Maybe he is now the devil to somebody else or many people, or dealing with his inner darkness in that picture. So I see a lot of stuff in that picture.
Good, interesting.
Okay, again, a tremendously difficult question, and my choice would probably be between some of the sort of satanic imagery produced by Robert Mapplethorpe and the late 19th century painting by Jean Delville, The Treasures of Satan.
There's a monument, and I'm sorry that I'm blanking on the sculptor's name, but there's this, again, it's a Christian image of Lucifer as the fallen angel, but Lucifer was so sexy in the image that they had to kind of hide it away. So it was meant to be this kind of like big public Luciferian monument, but I forget what it's called. Anyway, there's a quick cutaway of it in the film.
But Satan is kind of hot.
Yeah, that was always the
Yeah.
problem.
I remember that in, I think it was Naturhistoriska here, that at least when I was a kid, it's a strange museum to have, but I think they had like a weird Hieronymus Bosch painting, which makes no sense that it would be in that museum, but I remember as a kid staring at it, and like a demon with a trumpet coming out of his ass, and I also found it extremely petrifying. Christian imagery is kind of the strongest of it.
Yeah, I mean, they really went to town when they could, let loose, and I mean, there were rules for how it depicted the Christian deities, but when the demons came in, it was like free for all, design-wise. Yes, my favorite is of course the Devil in Polka Dot Underpants in Codex Gigas. And yeah, if you haven't seen it, here's a gift for you. Pass it along, please. The pins from, yeah, I'm not sponsored, unfortunately, by the Royal Library, but
I think you're in Stockholm.
yeah, it's very close by in Humlegården.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers. And since you're a movie producer, Gabriel, I thought you could start with, Hell on Reels, the Satan on the Silver Screen. What's your favorite depiction?
I have no idea. I don't think I've seen any good Satan movie. I mean, apart from this one, of course. But I don't know. I can't think of any like cool satanic. Like I gotta think about it.
Come back to you.
Yeah. Come back to me, and I'll probe my memory.
I know you all just rewatched this, so it's fresh in my mind. But the Tim Curry Satan in Legend is my favorite movie Satan.
Favorite movie Satan? Without a doubt, I would say Robert De Niro as Louis Cypher.
Yes.
Agent Heart. You will never look at an egg the same way again after seeing this film.
Well, I don't know, but off topic maybe, but Sam in Cheers, he's kind of like the devil.
Okay,
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
that works. Yeah. Any,
Nothing.
Yeah, we'll get back to, we'll circle back to Gabriel, but yeah, how many of you saw Curse of the Demon, the classic that we screened on Monday? Yeah, some people. And the rest of you have a beautiful gift to unpack. That's the coolest devil on film, I think.
Is that Satan though? Isn't that
Right, isn't
the
it
fire
just
demon?
general,
It's a
like-
fire demon, yeah. I'm stretching it a bit here, I admit.
I
Seems
think
like you're a satanic.
Yeah, but I mean, if Mia can go with Sam, I can go with fire demon. Well, anyway, as you just saw in this great documentary, Satanism as a political force is very current, but it's not the first time. So I wanted to ask Per, who has written extensively on Satanism and Satanic Feminism. You published a big, doorstopper of a book. It's a great read. Could you tell us a bit about, in Sweden there are some pretty unexpected people used Satan as a symbol.
Yeah, I guess what you have in mind is the early satanic history of social democracy in Sweden. When they first started out, the Social Democrats in Sweden were more of a revolutionary force, and they wanted to appear frightening. And they were very sort of antagonistic towards the Church of Sweden, who were among the main enemies. So what they did, or what some of the early Social Democrats did, was they picked up the old symbol of Lucifer as the rebel against authority, and of course Lucifer as the rebel against church having influence over the state. So early Swedish Social Democrats published pamphlets in journals titled Lucifer, which contained harshly anti-Christian poems, actually so radical in some instances that they would tell people to go out and burn churches and murder priests, that sort of thing. So it's very sort of proto-black metal in terms of the themes that the Social Democrats employed. But of course, when the Social Democrats started instead going in the direction where they wanted to have like parliamentary support and do this the democratic way, they had to get rid of these radical elements within the party. So they were all kicked out, basically. And some of them ended up in sort of anarchist groups. For instance, the ones that published the journal Brand. And the journal Brand continued to push this kind of satanic agenda well into the 1910s, but then it sort of faded away from anarchism in Sweden as well. But that's an interesting prehistory of Swedish social democracy, I think.
But was that only in Sweden, or was that kind of an international socialistic imagery?
Yeah, within anarchist circles, you definitely find it on the continent as well. And the Swedish socialists picked it up probably from people like Bakunin and Perón.
Okay.
Yeah. So like early anarchist thinkers.
Yes, this wasn't the only publication called Lucifer at the time, right?
No, there was also a Theosophical journal and a journal in the U.S. that later turned into a eugenics journal, but at the time was sort of anarchist and feminist.
And are these have there been other more recent examples that you've come across in your studies of political activism apart from this and Satanism?
Well, in the 1970s, you find in sort of West German radical circles, you find some sympathy for the devil. With, for example, Zweite Juni-Bewegung, who apparently had as their internal salute, "Hail Satan."
That is interesting. And kind of creepy in a very good way, I think. But from the personal is political, so I wanted to hear from Mia how you have used the devil in your art, and could you tell us a bit about that?
I think I've used Satan and horns and tails and just that imagery, symbols, and upside down crosses. And I actually signed my art with an upside down cross. And I've never, until you contacted me, I've never been aware of that, I make satanic art. I don't know why, and also I've never been called out. I mean, nobody's ever accused me of being a Satanist, although there is an annoying, persistent rumor in Russia that I'm schizophrenic. But,
Okay, it happens.
Yeah, but I think that for me it's deeply personal. I use these symbols because I was married to a very religious, a Christian man, a very religious man, who abused me for 5 years. And when he attacked me with violence, he often said, "I'm going to beat the devil out of you." So in a way, that made me Satan. So I thought, let's own this shit.
Yeah. I'm really glad you got away from that abusive man.
I know, and I built a whole career around his BS.
Yeah. Yeah, fuck him, right?
Fuck him.
And that correlates very much with what we saw in the film right now. And there were a lot of stories that you came across, Penny, while doing the interviews that are pretty similar to Mia's experience, right?
Yeah, and again, we put a lot in the film. Of course, there's so much more that didn't make it in the film. And I would say the biggest surprise of the experience of making the film was meeting people who were involved in the Satanic Temple and kind of getting to the chapter level, like getting away from the Baphomet campaign and these big kind of lawsuits, and then getting down to the ground and meeting people who were just everyday people who were involved in the Satanic Temple, and how many of them spoke similarly to what Mia just said, that somehow like they had been accused of being a Satanist in some way by somebody in their life, whether that was like the system or a particular family member, and that this sort of self-identification was a way of kind of owning their own power, and in some cases kind of loosening the chains of superstition and fear that they felt were keeping them locked up inside. And so it really was surprising to hear that again and again. Like it was not an outlier story, it was, I would say, the modal story, like the typical story, and it really changes the way you think about it as if you're an outsider and you look at, say, for example, the rituals or the imagery, the upside down cross or the pentagram. Like, it's really easy from the outside, if you don't know anything about Satanism at all, to assume that that's just a kind of like someone's trying to get a little more attention. It kind of looks like it's all about what it produces in you. Like if you're offended by it, that must be the point. And I came to understand that that might be there, that's often there, but that the more common explanation for these mostly private rituals and private, sort of exchange of images was that it was liberatory to the person that was doing it. So it didn't have anything to do with like what some guy on Fox News thinks about it. So that was kind of interesting for me.
And I think it's interesting because that was the idea from in the first place, to have a reaction, to frighten people, like a moral effect. Look what happens if you go this way.
Yeah, I think that's
So
common.
they were-
That was common too, right? Like
Uh-huh.
sort of very many people in that I think came for the laugh or came for the shock or came for the troll, and then if they stuck around, which most people don't, they stay for like the universe of meaning that they can find in the philosophy. So those two things were not mutually exclusive. I came to understand.
And this is also coming from the traditional art history, Christian art. So it's not a satanic thing at all, in a way.
Yeah, yes and no, but you founded your own circle of outsider artists, Mia, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about
Yes, sure.
Art Monsters of Sweden and your podcast that you have with your colleague?
Yeah, I have a podcast called Art Monsterspodden with Maria Wingård, also a dark artist. And it's a strange thing that, and also I'm very grateful for being here at the Monsters of Film Festival, because that's amazing. You have a scene for obscure films, but we don't have an art scene for obscure art. And that's what we want to change. We want to bring dark art, lowbrow, steampunk, pop surrealism, and etc. into the mainstream stage of art in Sweden. And it's weird because it's like somewhere in history there was a divorce from traditional art. So it's like traditional art and then dark art. But the whole art history is full of dark art. So it's very strange. So it's not new. It's just that it was forgotten about.
Yes.
And I don't really know when it was that divorce happened.
Maybe we can ask Per, who's a lot of... yeah, you're a go-to guy here for the historical bits.
Yeah, well, I guess it all depends a bit on definitions, but I'm not sure that such a divorce has taken place. In a way, I find a lot of contemporary art to be very dark. On the other hand, perhaps the techniques employed and how it's framed would have pushed some things out of mainstream highbrow art. That's a very vague answer, I guess. But yeah.
It will suffice. It's interesting to see it in a larger historical perspective, because when you check out your book, Satanic Feminism, you see that, of course, it's a focused perspective, but a lot of the art that was pretty mainstream in its day used these symbols. I mean, it was commercial commodity even in the 1800s. I know that you collect a lot of art artifacts and jewelry and so on. I mean, Satan as the liberator of women, for instance, was a bankable thing. But switching gears a little bit, Gabriel, you're also a musician. You have a band called Odd Rumblings, and you had some stuff to tell us about the more overtly devilish music, because as you saw in the documentary, what we're dealing with here are atheist Satanists. So it's the symbol of Satan, not a guy that you go down to visit down below.
Well, exactly, it's this. I mean, we'd often say as a refrain to people, well, there were never really any devil-worshipping Satanists, so to speak. Like, the concept of people actually worshipping a deity called Satan is very much a myth. Except in modern times, there was like one period where that was not really true in form of like organized satanic worship, and that was kind of here in the early 90s. And, like the moral panic, like there were so many moral panics about Satanism and Satanists coming to kill people and burn churches, but it was actually true. I don't know if you guys remember, but like in like the second black metal wave of Norway, what the crazy people who were doing that, was probably the only time where people, in modern times at least, attempted to kind of make a sort of theological. I mean, it was a bunch of idiots, so like it wasn't a very deep zone.
I hope we don't have too many true people here who take offense and rock knives or something. I think that was a real thing back then.
Yeah, I know.
The singer from Therion who had a little girl go up to his parents' house and nail
try to burn it down.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
exactly.
So But it was at least interesting that like at one point then the kind of moral panic that came from it, you could at least argue in some way was a legitimate panic against a kind of organized.
Was it organized?
It was organized in a loose way around like a music scene, and I mean they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. It's just like there was an attempt at kind of forming people who were somewhat genuine in an attempt to do that, and that kind of grew out into. I think there's a semi-attempt at like theological Satanism now called like Gnostic Chaos Satanism or something. Is that the thing that like? Yeah, Chaos Gnostic. Yeah, which I guess is kind of a supernatural of sorts approach. Yeah. So, but I mean, certainly not anything that's mainstream, and the vast majority of people who would collectively identify Satanists today are clearly of the atheistic kind, regardless of kind of like the more sectarian division in it, I think I would say.
Yeah, and there were some, you want to add something?
Yeah. But I think with the theistic versus atheistic Satanism thing, that story is perhaps a bit longer than what you suggest. Some scholars have even interpreted Anton LaVey's early writings as having sort of a theistic strain running through them, with some of his phrasings about Satan as a dark force in nature, and some other things about the soul somehow living on after death. And of course, in 1975, there was a big split in the Church of Satan, where a person that could possibly be described as Anton LaVey's right-hand man, Michael Aquino, left the Church of Satan and founded the Temple of Set, which is definitely theistic. It is based on communion with Satan or the Prince of Darkness as a spiritual entity.
Right, but I mean, it wasn't, if we're talking about theistic groups of Satanists who actually kind of frightened an outside community, my understanding is that Aquino and his followers were kind of more insular in there.
Yeah, that's true in a way, but on the other hand, in the 1980s, representatives of the Temple of Set would appear on talk shows in the US and so on. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, of course you could also make the story about the Scandinavian black metal scene a bit more complicated, I guess.
Of course.
With actual groups coming out of that. First, of course, the very lame attempts to form something with the Black Circle in Norway and the True Satanist Horde in Scandinavian Sweden. But then growing out of that, as you mentioned, the Chaos Gnostic thing. And there's a variety of groups within that current. And I guess in a way, theistic black metal Satanism is not really as marginal as one would perhaps suppose. I think it's not really tightly organized into groups, but in terms of people who have that sort of worldview, I would say it is not that much smaller than atheistic Satanism was prior to the Satanic Temple, because that really sort of changed the game.
Right.
But if you would compare like people actually being members of the Church of Satan and people being deeply into sort of theistic black metal Satanism 10 years ago.
About the same.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, now we have a game changer here.
Well, we don't know, right? We don't know how many people are in the Church of Satan.
Exactly. It's a custard that can't be nailed to a wall. Of course.
A custard?
A custard, yes. Why not? But you had some examples from Florida, right, Gabriel? Or?
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that like at that time, we were talking about this yesterday, this feels like such a niche part of the discussion, but it was exactly this, like there was an upgrowth, a kind of attempt to formulate theistic Satanism in Scandinavia, in Florida, and as far as I know, when it was tied to a music scene, those were the only two parts. I mean, it makes sense, Florida being the most probably satanic part on the planet. So.
Is it because of the gators and stuff? Or?
It's because of all the flamingos.
The flamingos, yeah. Big guys. So, let's go off the deep end here, and I'm going to ask you directly, Penny, in a UAC fashion. Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Satanic Temple?
I got a membership card to the Satanic Temple before we started the film, and then I regretted it, and I was like, I need to send it back or something because people will accuse me of working for them, and I just never got around to it, and I feel like I should be lying about it, but I can't because I told the truth at some point. But I don't think of myself as a Satanist, which really is exactly the kind of thing that muddies the waters when it comes to who the Satanic Temple really is. You know, they have over, probably at this point, well over 100,000 members. But how many of those people like truly identify religiously as Satanists? It's an unknown. Like I think many people support their activities and support them politically or support them philosophically, and want to support them by getting a membership card. So I did, but I wish I hadn't, because now I have to say
really
yes, and
coming
it's
back
I hate it. I just thought the card was so cool, and I wanted it in my wallet, and it was before I started the movie.
Yeah, it's understandable. Yeah, because you came a little late to the game, so to speak. They've been working for a couple of years before you got the idea from.
Totally. So, like, if you get a sense of the film you just watched, I would say about half of it had happened before I even heard of the Satanic Temple. So, it was well into the Baphomet campaign. It was well into, like, the chapter structure having been formed. So by the time we knew there was an interesting story here, it had gone from something that looked obviously like a prank or a joke, with actors hired off of Craigslist, with that silly Rick Scott. Remember the Rick Scott rally? That was just 90 minutes ago. I mean, it's like such a crazy story evolution, right, from that. So it had already evolved from that early action to something organized with, at that point, about 50,000 members. So I already knew that's the story we wanted to tell, was like, how does something go from being so kind of overtly silly to being something that was so clearly deeply meant in such a short period of time, and like how do you understand the kind of fact that they were so clearly kidding, but also so clearly not kidding, and that was kind of the question that we wanted to get at.
Yes, and to be perfectly clear, I know that your photographer wanted it clear that a lot of the early stuff wasn't shot by her or him.
No. So we knew. I mean, this is a classic documentary problem. This is like one of the things that separates documentary from fiction. In fiction, when you're writing your script, you write something called the inciting incident. It's like what starts the story. In documentary, that's always already happened before you show up with cameras. I mean, whether it was yesterday or 3 years ago, it's already happened. So you have to sort of backtrack. So beginning the story is always really hard in a documentary. But I had a suspicion, which proved to be true, that these actions would have been pretty heavily documented, even if it was just with cell phone cameras. And it turned out they were, and not just with cell phone cameras. They had a lot of cameras at all of their events, which surprises no one.
But just to point something out to that also, like, I don't think we actually got our hands on the footage in the beginning until maybe, far into editing, the end. That's when we kind of unearthed that treasure chest of like, oh shit, there's actually, like, we found
for the costume.
Yeah, exactly. So before then we were like, well, we know what happened, and there's like a couple of bad cell phone things, but nothing like what we found. So sometimes you're just really lucky, and you stumble on something that changes everything.
Yes, and this was sort of a departure, movie making wise, because you've done a couple of documentaries before that were mainly or all archival material, right? Our Nixon and Nuts.
Yeah. I always thought that I think pointing a camera at people is like really rude, and I don't like doing it at all. So my documentary practice, if you want to call it that, was always involved people who were dead, who you couldn't say no to make a movie about them, and couldn't show up to your premiere and call you a liar or something. Did
you have that happen with this?
No, not really. Not in any significant way. I mean, I would say it's a different topic, but we worked with so many people in this film. As you see, like, there's so many people in this film, and we met so many people, and we've documented so many different strands of what the story was about. And it's tough because for each of those individual people, their thing is the most important thing. Like, which makes sense. Like, everyone's the hero of their own story. So, like, if we spend 3 days filming with you, you're pretty sure you're the star of the movie, and you might not be in it at all. And that was a little bit tough. So it wasn't like anyone was like, you're a liar. Well, that's not true. Some people have said the movie's propaganda and that TST paid for it and I'm, Lucian's slave or something. None of which is true. They had no degree of control over the movie, and they don't have any money to fund movies, much less the desire to. Anyway, so, I always liked archival filmmaking for a lot of reasons. And this was something that Gabriel and I started working together to make, because he brought all the experience of, like, actually producing a normal documentary where, like, you follow events in the real world with living people, and I honestly couldn't have done it without him, because, like, I still find it very difficult to do. I don't don't really like that part of it very much. So he helped make that possible.
Great. That was my next question about your role in the production side of things. How has that evolved and changed over your collaborations? Because apart from the feature films, you've also done a couple of interesting shorts, like about sea monkeys, for instance.
Well, I mean, so we started working because I reached out to Penny. I read an article about the Satanic Temple, and I thought to myself, this absolutely should be a film. I knew very little. I read like one article in the Village Voice, and it was fascinating. And I knew Penny's work. I followed her for a while, and we kind of moved in the same New York film circles. So we'd encountered each other, and I was already kind of eyeing, like hoping that we could work on something. And I felt immediately that, kind of based on what I knew and her style and her intellect and her temperament, I thought she'd be the perfect kind of artistic leader for it. So I reached out.
It was like a hoax at the beginning.
Yeah, we both thought this would be like a really, we misunderstood. We thought, like most people, this is totally a hoax, it's a joke. So the beginning we were a bit paranoid, even when they let us in. It was kind of like, are we going to be part of like a hoax, their movie? Are they making a movie that's a joke? And then it's going to be like the idiot filmmakers who come in and want to do it.
Yeah.
And we were so worried about
No,
that.
we were excited about
Well,
it.
we were excited to laugh. I was like, I hope we don't seem like two big idiots when that happens.
It was so different.
Yeah,
I mean, I
exactly.
think it was because like we were so surprised by the sincerity. Like it just
Exactly.
seemed
We
so
just didn't think that was
obviously insincere on the surface.
Yeah, but I mean, they have been called like a satanic yes man
Yeah.
collective, pretty
Yeah.
much. So.
And that's kind of how we would pitch it almost in the beginning, you know,
Yeah.
to get interest for it.
We didn't know. I mean, all we knew that said it wasn't a hoax, again, was this idea that there were all these chapters and all these members, which would totally make no sense if it was just a
How are
hoax.
so many people
Right,
come
so
out,
we
you
thought
know?
that's either a lie,
Right.
and like we're gonna find out
It's
that they
only
don't
like
have
Wizard
any
of Oz,
members.
like
and
3 people pretended.
these are
you
all
know?
actors or whatever. Or the alternative, which is that it was just more complicated than we could imagine initially, which the latter was true. And that's good, because it probably is a better movie for it being more interesting, more complicated than like it's all hoax. We thought Lucian had way more like puppet string pulling abilities than he actually does. We just
but I
thought
mean,
like he must be this master manipulator.
Yeah,
and
like
we were
master
no,
satanic leader who's
No.
controlling this narrative.
Nope.
Yeah, but of course that's how he wants to look, right? So it's not confusing. But we need to sort of.
I think he's so cinematic and fun to watch. Maybe a reality show.
I mean, it should be made clear.
Like he is, you know, they're often accused of wanting so much attention, and Lucian is told that all he wants is attention. He was the most reluctant documentary subject you could ever find on this planet. He hated every second of having a camera on him. He was physically exuded just misery about it going on. He did not want it. Yes, he's the only person who dislikes having cameras around in you.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that. It's like, oh, you excited? Not yet.
Yeah, he was happiest when we focused on other people, and I think that's what makes him also an interesting character. That he is obviously inherently a fascinating character because of what he's done and who he is, but he has absolutely zero desire to have focus on him.
Do you know his real name? Okay.
There's many layers to that. It's like a little Lundgren, that guy, right? So, but before we head into audience questions, because I think a lot of people want to ask stuff, I want to circle back to Mia and hear a little bit about your collective. Not as big as the Satanic Temple yet, but Art Monsters of Sweden. The goals and.
Well, we started out as an art collective, an online art collective for artists that felt at home with our concept, the mix of lowbrow art, pop surrealism, dark art, goth, and so on. And we strive to have group shows in art galleries, like themed art shows that are very common in the States. But Swedish galleries are kind of boring and stiff. So after 1.5 years, we still haven't found a gallery that wants to exhibit our art. But, you know, we found more and more artists, Swedish artists, within the genres. So we grew out of the collective. So we're now the Swedish lowbrow and dark art movement. Yeah, the starting point anyway. So.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're mostly an online presence since the physical brick and mortar galleries are yet to
if there
open up.
are any art people in here, please contact me.
Yeah. You have your own webpage and you have an official art of Monsters of Art.
I think that
Art Monsters of Sweden.
I think that our Instagram page is the best way to follow our progression. We also show art from international artists just to educate Swedes about the context that this is a movement, a global movement. Yeah. And if the art genres, lowbrow art and dark art and so on, I mean it's big out there. In the States, huge underground scene, and in the UK, in France, in Denmark, in Finland even, but here not so much. So.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, breakthrough.
I promise you.
Yeah, great. Per, as an esoteric scholar, have you been following the Satanic Temple, or it's been what we've seen on the film?
Yeah, sure, of course. All of us working on Satanism in a scholarly context have been following this phenomenon with great interest, and it took us by surprise. Actually, we could not have foreseen something like this happening, and I think this documentary is really excellent as sort of an ethnographic document that will be of great use to scholars as well.
What surprised you? What was it that you didn't see?
Probably the sort of response they got, how many people wanted to become involved, and how quickly it grew.
Yeah. I think that's interesting.
Yes, and one last question for me before we open up to the audience, because we have other people pounding at the door wanting to watch movies. Yeah, great. Of course you had a huge amount of stories to tell, and what made you pick this particular narrative strand? Because some people have, would say rightly so, said that it paints a pretty rosy picture of the Satanic Temple.
Yeah. So I think that, again, the difficult, I love books. Look, if I was like a really rigorous thinker, I'd write books, because you can really be a lot more complicated with like the amount of information you can put into a feature-length documentary is like a medium-length magazine story. I mean, it's just not the amount of stuff you can do in a book. So if you can make your 100-hour movie, you include everything. You can't make a 100-hour movie. So it goes back to the driving questions of the film. My goal was not to explain Satanism in totality. My goal was not to get into the intricacies of how a burgeoning organization manages itself and how they make decisions. I mean, it's not important. It just isn't, to me, the most interesting thing. The thing that was interesting was looking at this at that time, 3-year trajectory. How did this happen? Was the question I wanted to know. It was very surprising. It was sort of like, how could this group have gotten to be so kind of effective and so relatively big in such a short period of time? And how did the questions of sincerity and authenticity and religious identity kind of come into that picture? And what can I learn about American history and American identity through telling the story? So it's not made for a satanic audience, which would be this is not even Satanism 101. It's not even the beginning of Satanism 101 for a satanic audience, but the audience was conceived to be much bigger than that. So I left out so many interesting things. We did an interview with the Church of Satan that would have been great to include. We did a lot of historical work on the image of Satan through the millennia, which would have been great to include. We had a lot more about, frankly, the constitutional issues, which we made sound really simple, which are not. Nothing's really as simple as it is in the film, right? So at the end of the day, it's quite modest. It's really the origin story of the Satanic Temple, and we kind of lost things that didn't help support that story,
Yeah, that's why I have the Blu-ray.
Yeah, exactly. We do have some good extras, including that interview with the Church of Satan Magister. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and Mia, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I mean, the film ends with this, long shot of the slow shot of the statue. Yeah. Where is it now?
So the statue is now in Satan, Massachusetts.
Oh yeah. Yeah, a round of applause for that.
Salem, Massachusetts, where the TST headquarters are. So there's an art gallery, a reading library, and the Baphomet monument. You can go and sit in its lap and take an Instagram with it. But the kind of idea is that it's ready to be deployed, wherever it's needed, which is why we kind of ended on. That's why we ended on that image of it on the road. It's sort of like this, it could come to a town near you. Watch yourself, kind of thing.
Okay.
But if you, I don't remember now that if you see it on his lap, he had a
Caduceus.
Caduceus, yes. But you can't see it if you're sitting in front of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a good-looking monument. It really is. The first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is beautiful." And there was something about. That's why we ended up using it as the central storyline, even though there are other central storylines that could have been just as effective. It's a good image. It's a strong image, and it's a bronze monument that weighs 20 tons or something.
2 tons.
2 tons. And it costs $120,000 to make. It's so real, It just was the most obvious evidence that this was not just a joke. It's way too much work to do this if it were just a joke,
The whole TST is sort of an art project.
In
so
a
much
way.
art.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think all art is like an art. All religion is like an art project in a way, It's about
just,
aesthetics and narrative and iconography and shared meaning and so the role of art in religion is not to be taken lightly. It's real. That's what makes Satanism, and not just humanism or not just atheism or not just Enlightenment values. It's Satanism because of the art, because of the images.
Yes, I think we have time for one quick and very focused question here from the audience, please. No pressure.
Yeah, there's one very rigid arm going.
Yeah. Wait for the mic.
Have you gotten any blowback from the, let's say, more conservative side of Satanists?
Yes.
Has it been awful?
Yes. I was saying this at dinner last night, my least favorite new part of my life is my unwilling involvement in intra-satanic internet squabbling. I never wanted to be involved in it. It's not fun. It really is the biggest turnoff for me about the whole scene. It's just nasty and mean and weird and not often very fair. I mean, I guess it's just social media in general, so maybe I shouldn't hit it on the Satanists, but the Satanic Temple message board on Facebook, which I'm part of, is a cesspool of fighting. It's horrible.
I left it a month ago.
You left it?
Oh my god, it's like a second coming to peace. Just take the plunge and get off.
But there's been kind of a whole wave of people that are interested in the topic or in the Satanic Temple or in Satanism in general because of the film. And so now this new kind of unintended consequence is watching people who have watched my film, which, as I said, contains about as much information as a medium-length magazine article, getting onto the internet and lecturing Satanists on what Satanism is, and it's awful. Yeah. And I'm like, no, watch the movie again.
What have we done?
Yeah, what have we done? I always forget that people genuinely think they become an expert on a topic from watching a movie, which no one should ever think, but it's more common than you would expect, and it's been horrifying to watch people think that somehow this movie, which does not, I don't think, purport to be a definitive statement on Satanism, how many people think it is. It's a little bit awful.
Yeah. Yeah, until one more question. Yeah.
The Satanic mic, middle right, here, right.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask maybe Penny and Gabriel if you plan on revisiting the topic, like in a future documentary, maybe, I know you guys are probably pretty fed up with everything that is the Satanic Temple and its offsprings in Europe contra the US and everything going on with that. But like, maybe you can do your archival documentary in 10 years about what happened.
I think it's unlikely, and it's just a personality thing. Like, the thing I love about my job is that I get to get really deeply involved in something and then, like, not ever think about it again. So, I don't think so. It's unlikely. Do you think you're going to make another satanic project?
I'm convinced I will not make another satanic project, but I will say that it's possible, exactly this, that a similar film in 10 years. I mean, there's so much that's happened in a short span of time also now. Like, there's a growing faction called Satanic Worship that's here in Sweden. There's Global Order of Satan that's kind of like a splinter group out of TST that's growing and growing also. And there are so many stories that I would envision will come out of that and kind of unexpected growth from it that I hope somebody makes something about. It's just not us, you know? but something great will come of it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we will hang out outside for a bit. So, but before I leave you, I would like to just see if there's a question mark or an exclamation mark in your Hail Satan. So let's hear it. Hail Satan!
Hail Satan!
Definitely an exclamation mark. Penny Lane, Gabriel Sedgwick, Per Faxneld, Mia